welcome to today's version of my podcast, The Winning Pitch. I have as my guest Coach Jim Johnson, who was an esteemed, highly qualified, very successful basketball coach at I think it's the high school level. And then now he's coaching individuals and companies, and I brought him on to inspire you. So, Jim, it's your floor. Take it.
Sure. So I grew up in an athletic family. I actually played a number of sports, and when I got to high school, basketball became my love, and I was blessed to be able to coach, or not coach, but play for my father. That was our high school basketball coach at the high school I attended, and I played for him for 3 years and had a pretty nice career. In fact, in my mind, I thought I was so good that I was probably going to go to the NBA, and then I I went to college. I played 1 year at one school. I transferred to get closer to home and ended up not making the team. So I realized that the NBA was probably not going to come calling since I didn't make my college team. But it was a very humbling part of my life. But fortunately, I got straightened out. One part of that was I met a young lady that ended up being my wife. We've been married for 38 years now at school. So she kind of helped me get back. And then I really got into, I became an educator. I was a physical education teacher and a coach for 35 years. I started, my dream was I wanted to be a head coach at the high school level as soon as possible. And my dream came true pretty quickly. I actually, after being an assistant coach for 3 years, I became a head coach at a high school about 20 minutes from where I grew up. And I thought, I had some winning teams with the JV level. I thought I knew everything about coaching. And although this program I took over wasn't very good, in my mind, I thought we were going to turn it around in the first year. And I did such a wonderful job. We were 1-1 after our first 2 games. And then I led that team to 17 consecutive losses. And then the school decided to go in a different direction and let me go. So that was a really humbling experience for me. And but fortunately, the next year I got a break. I didn't know it at the time, but actually I had a local junior college coach asked me to be his assistant. And he ended up getting me back on my feet. And ironically, his name was Bill Van Gundy. And if you follow basketball, his 2 sons, Jeff and Stan actually is the head coach of the New Orleans Pelicans. When I coached with Coach Van Gundy, Stan was my age, 25, 26 at that time, and was a junior or a Division III coach. And Jeff just started as a high school coach. So little did I know that many years later, they would both be head coaches in the NBA. But he helped me get back on my feet. But my dream was I really wanted to stay in the high school level. And I got back, I coached at another school a little bit further from my hometown. And then in my late 20s, I got a break. My dream was to come back and coach in my hometown called Greece, New York, which is a suburb of Rochester. And we have 4 high schools in our town. When I grew up, we had 3. I went to one, and I came back and became a head coach at one of the other Greece schools. And when we took over, the program was in dire straits. They had won 2 games in the 2 previous years. And so we had a lot of work to do. And fortunately, that's when I really started to study leadership and how to build teams. And after the first 4 years, we had only 1 winning season. And then in my last 3 years, we actually had 3 of the best records ever in the school history. We were the number 1 seed in our postseason tournament. We got to the postseason semifinals 3 straight years, which the school had never gotten that far. And so we had a pretty good run. But one of the other high schools in my town, I always thought was the best job. And ironically, after my 7th year at the school of Greece Olympia, Greece Athena opened up, and I decided to go for it. And I was offered the job. And because their program had a losing season the year before we got there, they had some real tradition. They had won a state championship, and they had an NBA player play at the school. And so I thought this would be a really good opportunity. And it ended up being. I was there for 20 years, and we never had a losing season. We really had a really good situation. But the one stumbling block in my coaching career, and you being a former coach is often coaches are measured by how they do in the postseason. And there I was falling short. We never made it to our postseason finals. In fact, after about 8 years, we had never even got back to the semifinals after I had taken that one school for 3 straight years. And then I had something very unique happen to me. I had a young man come into our program. He tried out for his JV team. His name was Jason McElwain, and he was on the autism spectrum. This is back in 2003. And at that point, I knew very little about autism, but my JV coach, because he tried out for the JVs, came to me after a couple of days of trials. He said, Jason's not a very good player, coach, but man, he's got this big heart. I want to keep him in the program. I said, well, what do you got in mind? He says, I'm going to offer him the team manager's job and let him practice with the team. And that's what he did. And we had both teams had good seasons that year. And I was starting to admire Jason because we were so into the team. And although there were some trials and tribulations early in the season, we had built a pretty nice culture and the kids were starting to really embrace it. In fact, it used to always warm my heart because Jason would sit on the bench. And of course, I say sit lightly because during the JV game, he gets so emotional. And after the game, one of the varsity players would come out and I'd see him straighten his tie and tuck his shirt in so he could sit on the bench for the varsity game. Well, that season ended, and actually we got to the semifinals on the varsity. Now for the 5th time in my career, we lost in a close game. So Jason, what was really unique about Jason, because I coached for 30 years as a head coach, I rarely would ever have a young man, if they didn't make the team, try out again the next year. But Jason was different. Not only did he want to try out, he would come to all our off-season workouts. And I was getting pretty close to him. I was picking him up at his house some, and it was pretty neat. So Jason tries out for our varsity as a junior, and he doesn't make the team, but I tell him, I'd like to have him serve as our team manager. And he really embraced it. In fact, at our first team meeting that year, he got up and he says, Coach, can I say something to the team? I said, sure. He says, Coach, we're going to embrace this mantra. It's called stay focused, and we're going to help you win your first sectional championship. And I said, oh, well, thank you, Jason. And the kids really rallied around him, and we had another good season. We got to the semifinal now for the 6th time in my career, and we lose at the buzzer to our crosstown rival. So we are really devastated. So Jason comes back again and tries out for his senior again after going to all our off-season workouts. And when he tries out his senior year, I bring him in after a couple of days of tryouts. I said, J-Mac, J-Mac was his nickname, by the way, which I gave to him because I couldn't pronounce his last name. Unfortunately, he liked it. So I said, J-Mac, unfortunately, you're not good enough to make the team, but I'd like to offer you the team manager's job. But this time I got a gift for you. And he looked at me and said, well, what's your gift? And I said, well, for senior night, which is our final home game, I'm going to give you a uniform. I'm going to hopefully get you in the game. In fact, I kid people that periodically he would ask me about that uniform. And of course, I define periodically as about every other day. So, well, the season, we were expected to have a really good team. And we started the year off good. We won our first 2 games in a tournament. And then adversity struck. We had a kind of a real strife between some of the parents and our assistant coach, and it really divided the team. And in fact, I wrote a book about it called The Coach and a Miracle, because we'll get into the story in just a minute. So we actually, in the next 5 games, we really struggled. I thought we'd win all of them, but because we were so divided, we actually lost 3 of them. So we're going in this Christmas tournament with a record of 4-3, and I thought we were going to be 7-0. And we're playing at the host school is the biggest school in Rochester, and they were really good that year. And the reason I got in the tournament is because I thought it would be a great game between the 2 of us, but not the way we were playing. So in the opening round in that Christmas tournament, we won in a close game, and the host school, Fairport High School, beat this team in the second game by like 40 points that we had played 2 weeks earlier and beaten in double overtime. So the next day I brought him in for a short practice. We call that a shoot around because we didn't have school because it was during Christmas break. And I shocked him. Normally we get balls out and we do a little practice. We run through some plays and some shooting. But I sat in the bleachers and getting balls out, and I looked them dead in the eye. And I said, guys, I don't want to go to the game tonight. And they just looked at me like in shock. And then I said, unless we decide we're going to be united and play together, Fairport's going to beat us by 50 points tonight. But the best thing I did, I've studied leadership for a long time now. is I really became a better listener. And after I shared my little 5-minute motivational talk, I said to him, you guys got to be willing to share how we can unite this team. And then he finally started to open up. And by the end of the meeting, I could see that there was a little bit of bond. It wasn't a pure panacea, but it was definitely a step in the right direction. And it reflected in our play that night. We actually played a great game, and we lost to Fairport in overtime. And from there, that really gave us some momentum. And we won 8 of our next 9 games going into our final home game, which was senior night. And senior night is always a very special night. It's where we honor our seniors before the tip-off. And I went through 30 of them, and they were always very touching to me. But this was profoundly touching because now J-Mac, instead of his white shirt and black tie, which he always wore to the games, he's now donning number 52, which was way too big, but he didn't care. In fact, there was a rumor going around school that he slept in it for 2 straight nights after I gave it to him. But anyway, so the game begins, and that night we had a really good student body following, and they, at the opening tap, they start chanting, "We want J-Mac, we want J-Mac," I guess just in case I forgot. And going into the game, because we had rallied in the season, if we won that game, we had a chance to tie for our division championship. So I certainly want to give our team a chance to win. Number 2, although I wanted to get J-Mac in the game, I knew I had to get all the other players in before I could put him in. And the third thing is I want to get Jason with enough time so he could score a basket. I thought if he could score a basket, that's a memory he'll cherish the rest of his life. Well, after 3/4 of the game, we got everybody in but Jason. So with just over 4 minutes to go, I pointed to him. He nearly ran out of the court. He was so excited. And then what happened next profoundly touched my heart and soul. I'm usually a pretty macho guy. I usually don't cry at basketball games. But what happened when Jason entered the floor, our student body not only gave him a standing ovation, but they showed all these pictures, these placards of Jason's face that one of our parents had made and asked the students to show that if Jason got in the game. Well, Jason and I did not know about this. So it was so overwhelming emotion. I sat down, which I really did, and tears started to flow down my face. Jason's now in his first varsity basketball game. First time we get the ball, Jason gets the ball in the right corner behind the 3-point arc. He lets a 3-pointer go. The crowd stands like in anticipation. It misses by like 3 feet. It's not even close. And I kid people, I know you're not supposed to pray in the public schools, but I was praying, dear God, please help him get one basket. Well, what a great lesson I think Jason shared for all of us to learn is that, one of the things we always talk to our players about is next play. You got to be able to move on, learn from your mistakes, move on, because basketball is such a fast moving game. And I think for a lot of people, if you fail your first attempt in an embarrassing way, you're not going to do it again. But that wasn't Jason. He just shrugged it off. So the next possession, we get the ball down the floor, and he gets a much closer shot from about 10 feet. And this time I got to add a little drama because it gets closer. It hits the backboard, hits the rim, and falls off. And the crowd groans. I'm thinking, all right, we're getting closer. God's starting to listen. And then our third possession, Jason this time gets it from the right wing behind the arc again. And he lets go a 3-pointer. And this time, magic. It goes in. The place just explodes. I'm thinking to myself, God must be a basketball fan. Not only has Jason scored, but he's got a 3-pointer. It can't get any better than this, right? Wrong. For the next 3 minutes, Jason turns into his boyhood idol, the late, great Kobe Bryant. And he starts making shot after shot. And I'm going to interject one thing, and then I'll tell you how the game ends, is that he's making all these shots. And I want to fast forward 4 months later after that game, and then I'll come back and finish the story. Okay. Jason is out in California at the ESPYs. He's one of the 4 finalists for the greatest sports moment of the year in 2006. And one of the 4 finalists is who? His idol, Kobe Bryant. Kobe had scored 81 points in an NBA game that year, and he actually beat Kobe out for the ESPY. So that was just a little sidelight. So anyways, Jason starts making all these baskets, and so with the 2 things I'll never forget, is with 1 minute to go in the game, by this point, I had no idea how many points he has, but he had a bunch of threes. And I get a tap on my shoulder, and I'm shocked. I look behind me, and it's J-Mac's mother, and she's bawling her eyes out, and she whispers in my ear, "Coach, this is the best gift you could ever give him, my son." What would you have done? Of course, I cried harder. Then The game ends, it's like out of a Hollywood movie. With about 8 seconds to go, our opponent, Spencerport, and I want to give kudos to their team and their coach. They were great sports, and they score a basket. And our player takes it out of bounds, and normally he throws it right to our point guard, but for whatever reason, he throws it right to J-Max. So J-Max dribbling down the court, and I look up and I'm thinking Spencerport's just going to let him go in and make a layup. Oh no, he pulls up like 2 feet behind the arc. I'm thinking, Jason, don't shoot from that. It's way too far. He launches this rainbow, swish. As the buzzer goes off, I look over, our student body is flying on the floor. Our players are running on the floor. And I'll never forget this because Jason's parents have an interesting dynamic. His dad is 6'6", and his mom is 5'2". And I see this little bitty lady bobbing through the entire crowd to get to Jason. And she gives him a hug. And he liked that for a moment. Then our players put him up on their shoulders. At this point, I have no idea, Tom, how many points he has. And he's got the game ball over his head like this. And our public address announcer comes on and says, the leading scorer for the Trojans, our nickname, J-Mac, with 20 points. So he scored 20 points in less than 4 minutes. In fact, I kid people that I started calculating. I'm thinking if he played the whole game, he scored 160 points, which is pretty good. And so it was just crazy. And but the couple lessons that I really learned from that is because we had so much strife, I knew the kids did like Jason, but I wasn't sure how they would respond. And I never asked them to pass them the ball, but what was so cool, I call it the essence of teamwork, is they shined the light on Jason. Those last 4 minutes, Jason was the only one to shoot. In fact, I still kid Jason. I still see him all the time. That I'm still looking for your first assist. He never passed the ball once. And then the other thing that I think was great in showing about teamwork was the fact that Jason had to now go back because there was a rule that you had to be in 6 regular season games to be on our postseason roster. So Jason knew up front that that was his one time and that he was going to go back as team manager, yet he supported us more than ever. And 3 weeks later, before a crowd of a sold out arena. Normally, basketball is not huge around here in my area. So normally for a championship game, we'll get 3,000 or 4,000. If we walk in the arena that night, there's 11,000 people there. It's just because what had happened is I really felt I had done it for all the right reasons. We had no media attention there. And the only responsibility I had the media after that game was to call them the score. And I told them that Jason scored 20 points. And I thought it would get a big deal in the newspaper, and it didn't. But what I didn't know is the next day, Jason's speech pathologist at school, he had never come to a game, but he worked with Jason for 4 years. He was so touched by the game that he called one of our local TV stations. And they came in and did a story about it. And by the end of that weekend, we had CBS Evening News call, and we had ESPN, and we were on Good Morning America. It was just crazy. And of course, we're trying to prepare for this sectional tournament that 3 weeks later, 3.5 about weeks later after that game, we won our first sectional championship. And I remember kids the next day at school after the JMAC game coming up to me because I was showing it in my class, and kids were coming out and go, Coach, this is going to get on ESPN. I said, ESPN? And we get a headline in our local newspaper. But ironically, for our championship game, we had gotten so much media attention. Actually, ESPN was at our game and actually showed highlights on SportsCenter of our championship game. That's how crazy it got through that. So, and then go ahead.
We were
Sure.
talking about parents in school.
Yeah.
If I had been you and you had come off the floor after that game, I would have expected one of our parents to say, "See, I told you should have been playing him for the last 3 years." Now, back to you.
No, it's a good point. I did get teased, actually, to kind of piggyback on what you said. About a week later on TNT, Charles Barkley, they brought up the story, and he says, I would have had that coach fired. He should have played that guy all the time. So, in fact, they got it on in our local newspaper. It was a quote from Charles Barkley, and one of my colleagues cut it out and put it above my desk just to keep me humble for the rest of my career. So, and then The neat thing is Jason and I, we stayed fairly close. We ended up doing a lot of things, and we still do some speaking and stuff together. But he actually left. He graduated from high school and he went on to work. He didn't go to college. He had an IEP diploma. But 2 years later, he actually came back to me, said, "Coach, I really missed the program. Can I come back and help out?" And so the last 9 years of my coaching career, he actually helped me, and he would come to Pratt. In fact, it was funny because, I'd go speak someplace in the country. They say, "Do you still see him?" And I start laughing. They go, "Why are you laughing?" I said, "I see him every single day. And if I don't, he texts me like 10 times a day," because he was so into basketball. And as I tease people, that was the first year we ever won a championship. And then in my last 10 years, we ended up winning 6 championships. So that kind of opened, and that was kind of my 4-minute mile. And Jason was on the bench for 5 of those. So it was pretty cool.
Awesome.
Yeah. So, and just a little motivation for everybody. Jason was actually quite small. I was wondering if he was going to grow because his dad is 6'6", but his mom's 5'2". And in that game, he was like 5'9", 125 pounds. He's now 6'1", about 175 pounds. So he's really put on. He grew about 5 inches, and he also really got into running and weightlifting. And he was a runner in high school, but he was very average. And now he's run, I think, 12 marathons, and he's broken 3 hours in the Boston Marathon. So he's become quite an accomplished runner as well. So he never ceases to amaze me with what he does in his life. So,
Awesome.
Yeah.
So what motivated you, and where did it happen in your schooling period, or younger than that or older than that, to become the kind of coach that you have become? Was there an incident or something that you got from your parents or your dad or your mom?
Well, my dad was definitely probably my first role model in coaching. He was much more composed than I was early in my career. I was pretty emotional. But I started to really, when I think a real turning point was when I lost that coaching job early in my career, because it motivated me to 2 things. One, I wanted to prove that school was wrong for letting me go. And 2, it made me realize, because I was pretty cocky, here I was a head coach at 25 and I'm thinking I know everything. And I realized that I had a lot to learn, and that became my study of leadership. And actually, I've read well over 1,000 books on success, teamwork, leadership now. But one book that really opened my eyes many years ago was Dr. Covey's book, The 7 Habits. And one of the things that I really got out of that book was understanding your why, your mission statement. And when I got clarity about that, I became a much better coach because I understood who I was, and my players understood, what I stood for and that kind of thing. And I think that was really helpful from that perspective.
So what is your why?
So my why, my personal mission statement is to be an outstanding role model that makes a positive difference in the world by helping others make their dreams come true. And so what I did is I really started to think about that I wanted to be someone that people would look at as a great role model. So I became much more cognizant of that. And secondly, I really became someone that wanted to help others and serve others and find ways to make people better. I really took a lot of pride in my own personal growth, and I really wanted to help others grow as well.
So where did that come from?
You know what? I think that came from a lot of study, observation, and like one of my guys that I studied in coaching, by reading a lot about him and listening to some of his interviews, was John Wooden. And he just seemed like first of all, he was very controlled. But he was very, like just things like, if you plan to fail, you fail to plan. I mean, he had just so many great little slogans or quotes that I picked up. And the one thing that, the more I listened to a lot of his former players on the fact that he was such a great model for them. And, he's a great family person. He was a guy that they just respected. And that was something, as I started to study, coaches and leaders, I really wanted to be someone that they looked to as a model and someone that they could respect, because I really wanted to live a life of integrity.
So as you went through this leadership training by reading and self-study,
Mhm.
what did you discover was the biggest flaw in your style prior to that?
Well, it's a great question. And one of the things that I do talk about is that because I mentioned it took me a long time before we won our first championship. And one of the things that I realized, because I would do a lot of reflecting after the season, I go, because early in my career, I wanted to blame everybody else. And then as my career got, I was like, you know what? If we don't do well, it's my fault. And when I started to really embrace that concept, that if we do well, it's the players that are it, and if we do bad, it was my fault. And when I started to embrace that, the player, and they knew I had their back, and so because of the fact that I took responsibility, to answer your question specifically, is that I really felt I was a really good role model for my players, and the fact that I was doing mostly the right things. But here's where I really was slipping, and I didn't realize it, and it really struck me the year before Jason's senior year, because we lost in this heartbreaker at the buzzer. But I realized what I was doing in those pressure games, I would lose control emotionally. And I couldn't handle the adversity. And what do you think was happening in my team? They also didn't handle it. So one of the things that I really made a pact with myself, and especially the fact that Jason's senior year, that first half of the year was as difficult as I've ever had in coaching. We had so much division amongst our team. But I realized that no matter what, I had to be the rock. I had to be under control. And I did such a much better job in that postseason tournament. In fact, in the semifinals and the finals, in the semifinals, we actually were ahead by 10 points in the third quarter, and we blew the entire lead. We were actually losing in the fourth quarter. And the old Jim Johnson would have lost it. This new Jim Johnson said, you know what, if I'm going to be a model, when things go bad, I've got to be able to handle it in a better way. And the kids responded, and we actually rallied, won the game. And then the championship game, here we are, we're getting all this media attention. And, we had played that team that we played in the championship game twice during the year. We had split. So we had each won a game. So I knew, it should be a good game, right? We start the game, we're down 13-2. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And so, but again, I just did a much better job of controlling myself. And the kids responded to that. And, we ended up rallying, and then we won the game late in the game. And what I really learned from that is how the importance of how you handle adversity as a leader is going to trickle down either in a good way or a bad way. And the players really then responded, because, then we ended up winning 6 of those championships. And, we ended up making the finals 8 times in my last 11 years, after never making it in my first 20. So it was, with that run, they realized that, this guy knows what he's doing. He's going to have their backs. They're going to keep them together. He's not going to lose control. And, I think that was a really important lesson for me to learn.
You've actually reminded me of the last couple of years that I stayed coaching varsity baseball. I was an assistant coach to a guy who's very successful. We're still great friends. I've been retired from coaching baseball now since 2017. But he was a fiery guy. And all I did during the games, if he started to lose control, I'd remind him, I says, if you want these guys to lose, you keep that up, because the way that you go is the way that they'll go. You start complaining at the umpires, they're going to start complaining at the umpires. You start mumbling at each other. I mean, it just breaks down. It's just a virus, and you have to learn to control that.
Right.
And I remember the first couple of years I was coaching with him that, we were friends, but you try talking to me during a game, I wouldn't talk to you.
Right.
And I thought, well, maybe he's been successful. I've never been a section champion, as it's called here. And, he listened, and he was successful 95% of the time. But, you have to remember, as you've stated, that you're being the role model. You're the one who's showing them the way.
Right.
And they'll gravitate to your bad habits quicker than they'll gravitate to your good habits, and it just takes
Yeah.
more time. But
Well said.
I understood that, and I run my company that way. I never ever lose control. In fact, I've only lost control in this company one time, and it was because Xfinity couldn't figure out a way to keep my internet and my phone system running. And so it's hard for me to say anything nice about them, but I don't know how to control that. That's not one of the controllable pieces that I should learn how to control the controllable.
Right.
It's a tough world. It's a tough world, and you just have to realize that you're doing something. From my philosophy, I knew I was doing something that was making that occur for me, and
Right.
maybe I just needed to. Maybe I had some pressure build up, and I needed to scream and yell, but it didn't have a good effect on my employees. So after about a day or two, it was over with.
Right.
And my wife is really fire. I mean, she's the kind of person that she'd probably like to get out and fight with everybody if you do anything that crosses in any one of her lines that are not supposed to be crossed. And she was really uncomfortable when I was doing that. So I always told her, well, I only did it to show you what you look like. Now, she knows it's a lie, but it just sometimes sometimes you have to make the best of it. So.
Right. I got to tell you, it was kind of the opposite with me because I'm a pretty fiery guy. I have calmed it down over the years, but my wife would always give me a critique after the game, so she was much more controlled than I was. Let's put it that way. So.
Well, sometimes that's all it takes.
Yep.
You've got to be that.
Yep.
You have to be the person that allows the emotions to flow through as opposed to sticking on something, because when they stick on something and now you've got two opposing forces and they're just going to get stronger, and it's just going to build up even more and more.
Right. Absolutely. Oh, yeah.
So thank you for telling me about your basketball journey. Now tell me about your journey to what you're doing now and how you got there.
Sure. So, well, because I was really big into my personal growth probably the last 25 years of my life. And so I started to have more success, and, I was trying to, help some of my colleagues. So I started to speak a little bit like at basketball clinics and that kind of thing. And I was trying to figure out, if I could do something like, because I started to follow like, some of the big names like, Tony Robbins and Zig Ziglar and Jim Rohn. And, I was listening to those guys a lot, and I was like, you know what, maybe I can do something like that. Well, then the JMAC game all of a sudden opened some doors for me. People started to call and said, hey, can you tell us about that story? And so I started to do a little traveling, and I was, doing a story, and I had really no idea, how to be a speaker. And, but I started to learn some things. I had some natural ability because I was, public speaking every day with my teaching and coaching. But it's definitely, it's a different profession. And actually, a guy gave me, I was speaking at an event about a year and a half after the JMAC game. And this guy came out after my talk, and he said, Coach, you got a lot of potential to be a great speaker. And I said, oh, thank you. And he says, you should join the National Speakers Association. And I looked at him, I said, what's that? Because I was pretty clueless. I had no idea. And that was actually a great bit of advice. I when I got back home, I investigated, and I ended up joining. And I've been going to their conference for over a decade now, and that's been very helpful. I've learned a lot. I have a couple of mastermind groups with fellow speakers that we speak every month, and I've learned a lot about all the aspects of speaking, from the business aspect to platform skills and everything, social media and all the other things on that. So that's been kind of a fascinating journey for me. With my brand is I call myself an inspirational leader. So I do like a motivational, inspirational talk about the JMAC story. I also do a presentation on 7 keys to be a great leader. And then I have another presentation on building championship teams. And, I do a goal setting workshop, and I have a book, and I'm actually working on a second book because leadership is one of my passions. I have a lady that works with me, and she's been on me for years to write a leadership book. So when the pandemic hit, I said, you know what, if I'm going to ever do it, I'm going to do it. So I actually teamed with a college professor here, and we're writing a book for young and emerging leaders. So we started about a couple months ago, and we're want to get it completed by the end of this year. So So that's what I'm working on. And the other
So
thing,
has the COVID really reduced your speaking?
it has. What happened, Tom, is that when COVID first struck, I didn't, I thought it would go away pretty quick. And then little did I know that I was wrong on that. But so, I love live events. I mean, and I've been able to travel around the country, and I enjoy, speaking, inspiring, and helping people with tangible skills to help them in their lives and their leadership and building teams. And when they stopped all these live events, I'm like, I wasn't sure I was going to stay in it, because that's what I like to do. But the more I thought about it, I said, you know what? I believe I have a good message for people, and I think I can help people. So I want to stay in the game. And so but I got to admit, it was something that I did not pivot quickly. I know some speaker friends of mine that pivoted way quicker than I did, and ended up still having a pretty good 2020, where I did not. I mean, I ended up probably doing 10 virtual presentations, but a few of them complimentary because I didn't really do virtual presentations, so I had to learn, all those different things. And but now, I'm working on an updated video with a combination of live and virtual. And I hope to have that finished in 2 weeks. And and that's what I'm doing now. I'm doing virtual presentations. I believe we're going to start to see live events. I'm guessing the second half of this year, or definitely into 2022. But so. But I've weathered the storm, and I guess the good news for me, opposed to I guess a lot of people, is that, and you being in the financial world, I guess you appreciate that. I woke up in my early 30s with a net worth of under zero, and I realized that I better start understanding some finances in my world. And actually, it was a Jim Rohn quote that hit me. He said that if you want to be wealthy, you should study wealth. And as simple as that comment was, it hit me between the eyes, because I'm like, oh my God, I know nothing about wealth building. And fortunately, I convinced my wife, and we started to save way better, and understand how to have a financial plan. And fortunately, we're financially pretty well off, and both of us also were teachers, so we have pensions. So I was able to weather the storm because I did have a good nest egg and that kind of thing. Whereas last year, if I would have had to rely on my speaking money, it would not have been a good year. We'd have been eating a lot of McDonald's. But fortunately, the good news is that speaking, as much as I love it, is not something I have to do to make a living. Fortunately, so.
Awesome. Awesome. So what is the biggest lesson that you learned as a result of the period of time to now, from, I think it was around the 20th of March that the lockdown started to occur?
Well, it's a lesson that I knew, but I didn't handle well early. And that was, and something I always go back and talk to my wife a lot about, because she's getting frustrated right now. Because, I mentioned to you before we went on that we have only one child, and he lives in California. And we usually go out there, and she has a sister that lives in California as well. So we usually go out a couple times a year, and then he comes home usually once a year, usually at Christmas. And we haven't seen him, in over a year now. So, but the one thing that's I keep telling her, and I keep telling myself, is if we want to have a good life, we have to be exceptional in things you can control. And we have no control over COVID. So, and then I guess the second thing is just the ability to be adaptable. And, like for me, I mean, if you just said to me, Jim, to stay in full-time speaking, you're going to have to be a virtual speaker, I would have said, no, Tom, I'm not going to do that. But then, you realize that, if that's, you got to find a way. And so that's a way that I can stay in it right now. And so, I've made adjustments. In fact, I just updated my office where I do my speaking. I'm just got a TV screen, and, so we're upgrading everything so it can be, even a better, presentation. So,
What's the biggest problem that you encounter shifting from live speaking to a group to doing where you're talking into a camera and you've got no live audience? What's the biggest thing for you?
The biggest thing is the biggest is the energy from the people, and because, like I've gotten to the point, because I've been speaking for quite a while now, I'm probably almost 15 years now. So I know, stories that can impact people, so you can see it on their faces, but, it's really hard in Zoom. You also, I know some of like the little stories that I'm going to get laughs out of. Well, so on Zoom, sometimes I can see their smiles, but you don't feel the energy. And so, and the other thing that's just weird is the fact that you are talking into this camera, in a room, so it's like, it's just you. And, I have a couple of guys I hire part-time to come in when I do a presentation. So they help me with some of the technology piece of it. But, basically it's just strange. I've gotten to the point where I've gotten much more comfortable, and I know I have to bring the energy, and I have gotten some nice compliments from some of the clients I've worked with recently. But early on, that was a struggle because, and the other thing is just, it's nice to be able to talk to people on Zoom where you can see them, but there's nothing like me, where I'd much rather have lunch with you and, get to, to me, that's, that part I really I miss, and I'm always going to miss.
There definitely is something about that third dimension, because right now we're in just two dimensions, and I don't know what it is, but
yeah,
I agree with you completely. It's just, we have to. It's an adaptation process.
Yeah.
What is the thing that you did to be able to bring your energy up to the level where you were more comfortable with it and felt it was communicating better? And I'm talking about doing Zoom calls.
Well, at first, what I think part of the struggle was early on is because I've never really understood a lot about technology. So I was always more concerned, like, is it not going to work? That kind of thing. And as I gained more confidence, and certainly I'm not a technology wizard, but I'm much more confident and clearer on how a lot of these things work. And because now I'm confident, because I've done, hundreds of presentations. So it wasn't that I couldn't do the presentation. It was just the fact, the manner, that making sure that, everything was working. So I wasn't worrying so much about, is the technology going to work or not work, that kind of thing. And once I gained that confidence, then it was like, hey, you just got to be you. You've done hundreds of presentations, and and then the nice thing, most of my presentations, I do talk about the JMac story. It's my signature story, and people want to hear it. And people say, do you get tired of it talking? And I said, no, that without a doubt was the greatest thing that ever happened in my coaching career. I was fortunate to have over 400 victories as a coach, and we won numerous championships, and nothing ever touched that night. It was just, I was numb for like a whole week. It was just, to see this young man that had dreamed of playing a game, and then of course, doing what he did. And a little sidelight is kind of funny, is that people say, were they letting him score? And I said, well, they weren't like right in his face, but to give me an idea of, like, to me, I'm a believer in God, and what people believe in, that's up to them. But is that, there was a higher power looking over him, because I'll give you one great example. One possession, he shoots a three and he misses it. And there's a long rebound, and one of his teammates grabs it and turns and basically just kind of hands it off to Jason. And it was the only time that Spencer, the team we played that night, really let him go. He dribbled in, he had a wide open layup, no one around him, and he missed it. So you think about that. He had 7 baskets. 6 of them were 3-pointers, and his other basket, his foot was on the line. So he was literally 2 inches from 7 threes, which would have at that time broken our school record for threes in a game. And he would have done it in less than 4 minutes. Yet the easiest shot he had all night, he missed the wide open layup. So, explain that.
But that happens in real life every day. As soon as you take the pressure, all of a sudden, normal people who are fully capable of doing amazing things can't tie the shoes. And
right. Yeah. Yeah,
how old are you, Jim?
I'm 61.
Oh, I'm going to be 73 in a couple of weeks. So,
well, you look great.
Thank you. I'll give you your $5 off camera. I've enjoyed the hell out of this run, and probably around the age of 70. My wife is 17 years younger than me, and she always tells me, "You're only as old as you think you are." And one day she looked me straight in the eye and says, "You're going to live to be 150." Well, I accepted that and started to look at the fact that I've got another 75 years to go. And I
Yeah,
was amazed how much it shifted my viewpoint about the way that I was doing things and the planning I was
right,
doing for the company.
right.
And then probably about well, in the middle of June, I hate probably because it's such a lousy word. She said to me, "I don't want to run the company if after you're gone." So then I had to shift kind of my, you know, I'm constantly pivoting based on my viewpoint. And obviously I'm deeply, deeply, deeply in love with my wife. So when she says she wants to go someplace, it's my job to figure out a way to get there and
Right.
making her happy. So, it's, I don't, this is your time. I don't want to get off on
No,
one.
no, that's fine.
So if you had one thing to say to every inhabitant of this planet, all 7 billion of them at one time, what would it be?
Can I give you two?
You can give me as many as you want.
Well, I think the first one is I've already said this, but I do want to say it again. Is I think you really got to have clarity of who you are, your why, and I really encourage people, to develop their own personal mission statement so they have clarity. Because I think when you really understand who you are, and then obviously trying to live that. Because one of the things when I talk to companies, it's great to have, like your business mission statement or your team mission statement on the wall. But what I really want to know is, does everybody know it and are they living it? And that's what I talk about with, certainly I'm far from a perfect person, but I know when I had that clarity about what the type of person I wanted to be on a daily basis, it really made me a much better person, a much better leader, a much better husband, friend, all the way, family member, all the way down. And the second thing is, I just really want to encourage everybody to be a go-giver and respect all people. And I think we had a really tough last year, a lot of division. And you know what? I'm okay. I disagree all the time with a lot of different people, but I always want to be respected and respect other people. And I just really want to reemphasize that, to treat people with the respect. I think it just makes a better world for all.
So you gave me three. I gave you the opportunity to give me 20 shots and you only took three. No, I think those are good messages for anybody trying to do anything. And I really, I'm with you all the way, brother. So other than the one book that you told me about, give me your top three.
Ooh, that's a great question. Okay, so I'm going to give you a book that I read recently called Atomic Habits by James Clear. Was really good. I really enjoyed that. And then there's a guy that died. He was a professor. His name was Randy Pausch. And I've got the book. Give me 5 seconds because I got two books that I want to show you.
No problem.
All right. So this book called The Last Lecture by Randy Pausch was a really, really cool book. This guy was a college professor. He was well loved. He was at Carnegie Mellon, and he gets diagnosed with cancer. And it's terminal, has about a year to live. And it's basically that book, and it's really a great life lesson. And then, I love like John Maxwell. I read a number of his books, but the other book that really, and it's probably, I think it was probably a pretty good seller. It was a New York Times bestseller. It's called The Seasons of Life. And it was actually written by this guy named Jeffrey Marks. And it's about a story about Joe Ehrlichman. Played at Syracuse, which is about an hour and a half for me, and then played in the NFL for quite a while. But the book is about, he came back and he volunteered, or he was assistant coach. He was not the head coach. I think he was a volunteer coach, in fact, of a football team and just the lessons he tried to teach us, the players on the team, day in and day out. I've read that book a few times because it's just really, really powerful. So that's if you're going to nail me down, those would be a couple that jump right out to me. But I've read so many good books. I mean, it's a topic I could talk over in length about. So.
Yeah, my favorite book is right over my shoulder here. It's called
10X. Well, I've heard of it. I've never read it. So
Get a Copy. Get
Okay.
a copy. It's an amazing viewpoint on life and becoming successful, and I listened to it. And Grant Cardone, who is the author, is such a charismatic guy
yeah.
that I connected with him instantly, and now we've become good friends. I'm an investor with him in a bunch of multi-level properties. I'm an
Oh,
investor
cool.
in some other programs that he has, and I consider him my little brother because he's 62 years old.
Okay.
And
Actually, ironically, I just listened to a podcast. He was on Lewis Ho's podcast, and
Lewis House, yes, got
yes,
it.
yeah.
Yeah, him and Lewis have been together for I want to say 5 years or so, and
Okay.
it's fun
Yeah.
to watch them because they came together as people who had common products or services, and then they really both help each other a lot. So
Okay.
I strongly suggest that. And in fact, Grant's got 7 or 8 books out now. Just type in his name, Grant Cardone.
Yeah.
And, if you like, do you like to listen to books?
I have listened to books in my car. I've become a huge because in the pandemic, I was I've always been an exercise guy. So I always exercise, but now because I need to get out of the house, I've been doing a walk even through, like, we had a snowstorm today. I still walk through it. So but I always listen to a podcast. So I've become a podcast junkie. The last 9 months, I've listened to probably an hour to 2 hours of podcasts almost every single day. So
Yeah. I get up every morning and walk for an hour. I try to get in 5,000 steps.
okay,
And I'm constantly. He has an online university which I absolutely love. It's
Okay.
really helps businesses and training, and I listen to his webinars over and over and over again because I know it's going to take times over equals certainty, and I know it's going to take a while. I didn't hear that the first time. Well, about the 10th or the 12th time, you start to really understand it to where it
right.
starts to really make sense. And when I find myself speaking it, I know I've gotten close to listening to it enough, and I only have another 100 more times to go. And I'm
Yeah.
sure, being a basketball coach, you totally understand about that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So we're reaching the end of our hour, and
Yeah.
is there anything that you felt like you've left on the table, or a play that you haven't put into this game?
You know what? If you it would take me about 2 or 3 minutes, but if you want, I could go through my 7 leadership keys very quickly. If you want to share that.
Do it.
No.
It's all yours.
All right. So
This is a podcast, so if you go over a few minutes, there's no harm.
okay. So the 7 that and this was, this is basically taking ideas from everybody else and then practicing them and putting it into my own thing.
You mean you're just a coach?
Yes. So
everything we know we stole from somebody else.
So that you understand. So and then you put your own little terminology to whatever it is. But the first one I talk about is clarifying your vision, which we've already talked about. Understanding who you are. You got to lead yourself first, personal mission, and then developing a team or business mission, depending on what you have. Number 2, which is probably the most important, is building trust. And the one thing when I talk to leaders, is that pretty much everyone would agree that it's hard to run a good team if you don't have trust. But what I talk to them about is, do you actually have a plan to build trust? Because we were really intentional when I took over programs that how we were going to build trust amongst our staff and our team on a consistent basis. And we talk about 3 things. One is that we wanted to tell each other the truth. So everything was based on the truth. Number 2 is that we were going to be authentic with each other and being willing to admit when we were wrong, be vulnerable. And the third thing is that we were going to catch people doing right more than we were going to catch people doing wrong. And that's how we really focused on building trust. The third key is what I call creating the edge. And creating the edge is, I really believe great leaders are always trying to find an edge for their team. And that was something that I was always trying to figure out. And the one thing that, we've all heard about this, but we actually taught our players how to set goals, and we would monitor their goals, and something you hear about a lot, but I don't think people really pay attention to it closely enough. And one of the keys, I think, is that as a leader, it's very important, I think, that you know your team members' individual goals and how they fit into the team goals. And because if there's a conflict there, you got an issue. Number 4 is being an effective communicator. And the biggest thing I mentioned a little bit when I was going through with my team, JMAC senior year, is I really became a much better listener. And I started to have not only players meetings, but we would have captains meetings. And at the captains meetings, I basically would just come in and ask 3 or 4 questions, and I would sit and listen. So I really wanted to get feedback. The other thing you mentioned about your wife, but one of the things I started to do way better the second half of my career is listen to my assistants. I used to tell my assistants that you just keep feeding me ideas. And you know what? And sometimes I'm going to tell you they're bad ideas and we're not going to go with them, or I'll tell you the reason why. But you got to keep feeding me ideas. And they really bought into that and helped us immensely in building that team. The 5th key I mentioned earlier is lead by example. And one of the things I always talk to our players about is you are always on stage. And I gave that illustration about that I was on stage in those postseasons when we were losing because I wasn't handling pressure situations well. It affected our team. The 6th one is what my leadership philosophy, which is called Leave a Profit. And basically our concept is everything that we touch, we want to get better, not worse. And I give an illustration. When we used to go to on the road to our opponent, we were going into their locker room, and I would usually walk in first. And if I saw like a piece of garbage on the floor, I would pick it up. And because I wanted to teach our guys that even though we didn't leave it there, that, we're going to make things better as opposed. And just simple things like that, like picking up a locker room, I think just grows to manifest what you really want is, to have a successful team that represents you in a positive way. But it starts with those small attention to detail. And then the last one is servant leadership, which I really believe is something that I think the best leaders are servant leaders. And I think one of the things that people get confused in servant leadership is they think it's soft leadership, and no, I believe servant leaderships understand they have standards. They have big standards and they expect high things out of their people, but they also teach them how to be leaders, and they also are willing to listen to them. And I think when you build that concept where you're training other leaders, then you got something really good. And that's why I think servant leadership, the essence of it is.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad to hear that, because the thing that I build my organization on are the things that I call my core values. The top
Yes.
one is service, ethics. Oh, now here I am going to make a fool out of myself. Accountability, teamwork, results, and courage. And we actually introduce that to people during the interview process. So we give them all of those things, and we have them come back at a second interview with what their definitions and how they think that applies, because we want to introduce, those are the pillars that hold up our organization. Mm-hmm. And one thing about a core values, it can't be something that you're not willing to fire somebody over.
Right.
These are our they're not negotiable. You can't, and you can't give us 5. There's 6. We need all 6 from you every day.
Right.
And as I was listening to you talk about those things, that sounds like core values to me.
Yeah, that's really what it is that, having clarity of, it's exactly what I call them with our players, that there are certain things are non-negotiables. These are part of our culture. Because I think one of the things I talk to coaches, but I talk to business leaders as well, that I think people don't realize how important it is that you have clarity on your values, your core values, what you believe in, and how you're picking your team. Because I think one of the things, like for us in basketball, talent is something we consider. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm not going to put John Jones has never picked up a basketball on our basketball team because he's a good person. Okay. I understand that talent is part of that, but I also want to understand that they are people that are going to be coachable. Okay. People that they have a drive to be great, and that they're we over me people. So those are three things that we really look at besides the talent to make sure we fit culture. And we've, cut players that were more talented than other guys because they didn't fit those three keys.
You have to have your non-negotiables, because if you don't have always, you get nevers.
Right. Absolutely.
Well, it's really been a fun time talking. Of course, we communicated on a different level because we were both high school coaches, but I enjoyed listening to you and talking with you, and you have my email address, so stay in touch.
Will do.
And, let me know when you're doing one of your live events. I'll get on and I'll harass you from the seats.
All right, that sounds like a plan. I will keep you in touch, and actually, I'll send you an email. I'll get the best address. I'll send you a copy of my book too. So
perfect.
Okay.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Tom. It was great to talk to you. So
bye.
Keep up your good work. Bye.